Hello, everyone. My name is Matt Arant, the founder of Arant Academic Planning. I'm an independent educational consultant based in the Austin, Texas metropolitan area who specializes in both Division III and Ivy League athletic recruitment, as well as boarding school admission. So while we're here tonight is about boarding school admission, and I'm joined by four schools that can kind of talk about their approach to the academic profile, as well as standardized testing. So I would let them introduce themselves. So Pamela, do you want to start our introductions?
Be happy to. I'm Pam Safford. I'm the assistant head for admission and enrollment at the Ethel Walker School. I'm also a graduate of the school from many years ago and just returned 4 years ago in this capacity. I've worked at five other boarding and day schools, mostly boarding. And this is my 40th year of work. And I keep coming back every year because there's no better job, as far as I'm concerned, than the admission job. Even as it has become more complex, it's become more interesting. And at the end of the day, we're all here because we love kids and love helping kids and their families. Walker's is an all girls school, or like what we like to say is an all four girls school. Everything we do, design, program, and as we create our culture, it's with girls in mind. We start in grade 7 and go through 12th grade, and we have a PG program. And we have both boarding and day at all of those entry points. 230 girls, 65% are boarding in the upper school, 33% are boarding in the middle school, grades 7 and 8. So kids coming from all over Connecticut, near and far, and then really all over the country and all over the world. I think I'll stop there, Matt, unless there's more that you hope I would say. We're in Simsbury,
No,
Connecticut.
when we get
Yeah,
to the questions, you might be able to kind of give your own twist on what your school approach is for those
perfect.
questions. So
Great.
Scott, you want to start with your introduction as well?
Sure. Thanks. So nice to be here with everybody. I'm Scott Eckstein. I am the Director of Enrollment Management and Financial Aid at Solebury School, which is a all gender 9th through 12th grade boarding and day school in New Hope, Pennsylvania, which is about an hour and 10 minutes from New York City and just under an hour from Philadelphia. I define us as a progressive school. We are proud to be so, and um, really design everything with the idea of who is this individual student in front of us and what can we do academically, co-curricularly, extracurricularly, social, emotionally, in order to help them sort of find their best success, to become their best self, and have the best eventual outcome for college and obviously for life. I've been here a long time. I've been here 33 years. It's becoming a real number. I love it. My kids have graduated from here. I've done a bunch of things here, but admissions for the last 18 years still teach a little bit of history. We are celebrating our 100th year this year. We are a smaller boarding and day school. Sorry, jumping around a little bit, but we have about 255 students in 9th through 12th grade again. Um, just under half are boarding from all over the country and all over the world, as Pamela said, and just a lovely place to be. So excited to be here with you all tonight.
Thanks, Scott. All right, Tim, you're up.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Excited to be here. My name's Tim Randall. I work at Suffield Academy. This is my 19th, 18th year overall. Like Pam, have been at a variety of schools, some boarding, some day, some single gender. And this has been the best experience in terms of location and the community and all the things that sort of fit with what my priorities are. Suffield Academy is a co-ed school of about 420 students located in Suffield, Connecticut. We are about halfway between Springfield and Hartford, and then about halfway between New York City and Boston as well. So lots of accessible travel options there. Like I said, we're co-ed, 420 students. About 70% of our students are boarders. About 30% of our students are day students. We are grades 9 through 12. And so, we really believe in just like Scott and Pam have mentioned, just that being so student-centered. We really believe in our students and want to see them move from, kind of the beginnings of ninth grade all the way through seniors and leaders and ready to head off to the next step from there. So excited to share more and get to know anybody that is interested in Suffield.
All right, thanks, Tim. Last but not least, Patrick.
Thanks, Matt, for inviting me to this panel this evening. So my name is Patrick Fraser. I'm the admissions director and director of financial aid at Stanstead College. Stanstead is a secondary school. Pretty common for some of the Canadian schools to have college in their moniker, but don't be fooled by that. We're a grade 7 to 12 school, co-ed, located right along the Vermont border, and about an hour and a half southeast of Montreal. So it is one of the few English language boarding schools in the province. I did mention co-ed. As for size, we're about 300 kids on any given year, and like the other schools that have spoke before me, majority boarding. Right, we're 80% full-time 7-day boarders, so it keeps the campus nice and lively on those weekends. I've done many things at the school. I've been around for 12 years. Started out in the classroom, was coaching, been in the dorms, did 7 years in the dorms, 3 in junior boys and 4 in girls with my wife. So know the place very, very well, and proud to say that my oldest is going to be joining grade 7 next year, if she gets in. So we'll wait and see, and then go from there. But yeah, it's a really great school. University prep is the main focus, but of course, like all these other great schools, supplemented with all kinds of athletic extracurricular activities, and really help these kids grow into fine young men and women.
Okay, great. Thank you all. So, as I kind of mentioned at the top, I specialize in both the college side as well as boarding, and I personally came from the college admissions side. And if you talk to any admissions rep about what are you looking for in your applicant, it's by and large the first thing is academically sound. So, thinking about what we think about academic soundness is rigor, right? That's one of the buzzwords you hear all the time in higher education, and it's pretty easy to tell what rigor is in college, right? You take your AP courses, your honors courses, dual enrollment, maybe it's an international baccalaureate school, whereas where you're sitting on the admissions to the high school secondary side, it's on its face doesn't seem as cut and dry because there's typically not as much added rigor at such an early age, right? So how do you evaluate that rigor within the lens of a curriculum in which it may not be as easy to say compared to an honors or an AP or an IB course at the college admissions perspective? Does that make sense? I know it's just kind of hard to kind of compartmentalize the rigor in the boarding school setting versus the college admission setting.
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in. I think I keep thinking of almost like I was just reading an article about college football, but it's almost like that argument of like you do the best you can with what you have available to you at the school. And some schools have an advanced math program where kids might be able to take Algebra 1 or even geometry as 8th graders or 7th graders. So that can be an indicator that kids are above and beyond what some of their peers are doing from that way. But we see that a lot, that a lot of kids don't have access to honors classes or APs or anything like that in 7th grade or 8th grade. So just doing the best that you're able to with the classes that are offered is a big help. This is actually where I think I miss testing a little bit, and we are test optional, so we don't see a lot of testing for kids who have applied to Suffield Academy. But for schools that we aren't kind of intimately familiar with, maybe outside of our kind of general region, a kid who scores, a great score on the SSAT and has great, like that tells us that the kid's really doing well, but also that the school's pretty rigorous, right? So sometimes a high test score, grades that are in the low 90s instead of high 90s means, wow, those teachers must be grading hard. Those are accurate grades. Whereas like some kids get a lower score and have gifted grade, that could be a lot of different scenarios from there. So sometimes when kids are kind of outside of our sphere of comfort as schools, that it can be helpful to just have that additional data point thrown in there. But yeah, we recognize that, and that's true for kids from around the country and around the world that sometimes just don't have access to a lot of the things that are typical rigor indicators that are in high school.
Yeah.
And you use that term kind of familiarity with the schools, right? So one of the big things you all do is you travel all the time, right? Whether it's going to the schools directly, the fairs. And so when you know those schools, even if it's doesn't have that gifted or advanced kind of tag, you've known for a track record of
Right.
several years, okay, here's what an A minus student at
Yeah.
this middle or day school looks like compared to one you might just not have any idea because it's in a non-primary market. So that's why like you brought up the fact the familiarity always helps kind of getting that initial academic assessment.
Yeah, if I could jump in, I mean, Tim, I think that's really well said by you, all of what you said. And I think, Matthew, what you were talking about, this familiarity, yes, there are schools that we all go to and travel to and know and get kids from year after year after year, right? So there's an advantage there. But even in your public schools, which, it's harder to recruit from, right? But there is tracking at these schools at the middle school level. I mean, there are accelerated classes, there are honors
Mhm.
classes, like, so you do get to see some sense of whether the kid is taking advanced classes and doing well in them, taking the classes and maybe having a harder time, or like Tim's talking about, doing well and working hard and sort of a core level eighth grade class or whatever it is, right? But ultimately, I think the job of admissions is more than understanding who a kid is, trying to do our best to predict who they will be at our school. And
Forecasting, right? Projection.
yeah, and so, you know, yes, it's lovely if a kid is taking super high level classes and doing well. Those are easy admissions generally, right? Like, the other kids who you're trying to figure out who are they going to become. Maybe they're in a public school that's just too big and the big classes aren't working. Maybe they need a little academic support, which a school like Solebury, and I think some of the other schools on this call, if I know them right, can do. Um, whatever it is, whatever framework that is, whatever combination of things it is, you can predict that there may be better things ahead for this kid in a different culture, in a different environment, et cetera. Which is why, like, I'm like Tim, we're test optional because, and we're going to get to this, I guess, but I don't think the SSAT is a particularly good predictor of success at the high school level. That's my main reason why I'm test optional, and we'll talk about it more. But ultimately, I think that's our job, is to try to figure out who a kid is, and the presence of rigor or the lack of quote unquote rigor in a middle school setting, I think tells you something, but I don't think it tells you everything, and so doing your best to understand it is our job.
I'm happy just to say that the reason I've remained in independent schools rather than going to the college level is that we're in the business of kids and kids who are growing. And in fact, kids heading off to college are still growing too.
Yeah.
But
Even
the
when they
stru
graduate college, they're still growing. We
indeed.
can kick
But
that ball down the field,
I would say this, no matter how many kids per spot are applying to our schools, good admission counselors are in the business because we're advocates for kids,
Mhm.
and then we're really good at finding evidence that any given student, with his or her their best effort, can graduate from our school.
Yep.
And so we are in the business of predictions, as Scott said, and we're good at finding evidence, and we're good at working with kids whose schools we don't know at all, because we
Mhm.
still know how to find good information. Sometimes you have to work harder, and sometimes you have to even pick up the phone. But my point is that we are advocates, and we're really good at what we do. Otherwise, the job would just be statistics, and you could throw stats into a machine and say, it looks like these kids will be just fine, but that's not why we're doing this.
Beautifully said, Pam.
I don't think I'm going to add too much to what my colleagues have said here, because I think my comment will become more relevant as we get into the test optional and test required things. So pass.
Okay. Well, Pam,
Happy
you
pass.
you
You get to go
mentioned
first
your
next time.
your your response reliance on evidence, right? So thinking about that in terms of recommendation letters written by teachers. So in the college side, it depends on the school. You'd have a teacher rec and a counselor rec, and for depending on the school you work for, it's not as heavily scrutinized maybe as others. Whereas I think where you're talking about the evidence part, the much more of a qualitative as opposed to quantitative assessment of a student. How do y'all look at those letters of recommendation as a, I guess, support of or a backup of a student's academic performance and predicted academic success?
Well, we require 3 reference letters as part of our application package, and we'll call at least one.
Okay.
Right? We're going to go on the premise that like not a lot of kids are going to submit a reference letter from someone who's not going to have some nice things to say about them, right? But we will call and schedule a 15-minute Zoom with at least one of the referees, and if there's cause to call a second or a third, we'll fully do that. Takes a little more time, but I think that yeah, I mean, people, communication is different written than when you can look someone in the eye and ask them a question. That's what I find.
Yeah, I mean, recommendation letters can be super helpful. I think sometimes they're also, it can be frustrating because some schools don't always cooperate, and that's not the fault of the applicant, that's not the fault of the kid, that's not the fault of the people that they're working with. And so, you see one kid has glowing recommendations and 5 different ones, and then the next one says, we don't fill out applications for students leaving our school, right? And so like that basically all we get is the yes, the student attended the school from this day and this time. So, I think again it's all kind of, as Pam said, like finding, nuggets, finding things that we can build on, finding things that reasons to accept kids within those recommendations, reasons for us wanting to support that kid as we go through this process. And at the end of the day, if it gets down to the last 2 or 3 kids in, why one versus the other two, kind of a piece from there. But we love getting, now that recommendations become a little bit more standardized, seeing some different things within there, seeing some different comments, seeing some different perspective from teachers can be pretty helpful from there.
Yeah, I think they're incredibly helpful. I mean, they are firsthand data, right? Observational data about a kid. And that being said, I love what everybody's saying here. You're trying to stitch them together into a fuller narrative, right? So how do the recommendations fit with the grades? How do the recommendations and grades fit with what the parent said about the student in their essays or in the chat you had with them in your office? How does that fit with what the student said about themselves, right? And sort of piecing, and if you do get testing scores of whether it's the SSAT or other kinds of educational testing or whatever, like how do all these pieces fit together? So, um, on their own, no one piece I don't think tells the story of the kid, and so you're trying to understand all these things in context and place them together, and it's hard. I mean, honestly, reading recs, even the ratings, their rating scales on these, and they have below average, average, above average, whatever. Are people filling those out based on their class, or are they filling those out among students in the world, in the history of the world? Like, right? And what do they mean by that? And so, Patrick talking about calling, and sometimes we do, if there's a good reason to do it and we want to uncover it. I'm amazed that you call every recommended for every kid. I literally almost fell out of my chair. That's amazing. But when there is a gap in the narrative, that's the kind of phone call that can really help sort of figure out how you're stitching it together.
So Scott, you mentioned kind of the arbitrary kind of rating system, right? Oh, like going back to me in the college side where I did athletic recruitment liaison, we had pre-reads where we'd have like a coach would give us a 1 for immediate starter, 2 for impact player, 3 for bench, 4 is not recruiting, but they still sent me that pre-read for whatever reason. I had to take their word for it that okay, this kid is going to be a legitimate contributor, but I can't tell that because I've never seen any tape. So it's very very subjective kind of metric. So when you have those like numeric rubrics, how does that come up, I guess, internally when you're reviewing the application, but also during committee? Is it more of just here's what they are and that's it? Or do you kind of dissect a little bit based upon what else is existing in the application?
so we dissect. I mean, that's why you have a committee, I think, first of all, right? So you get multiple readers and lots of people's perspectives, and you do dig in, like, again, what pieces are fitting together, and what if there are, let's say, below averages or above averages, what are they in, right? Like, is it in a work habit? Is it in a sort of a commitment to the material, or works well with others? I don't know, there's all kinds of different categories. So which ones are the kid excelling at, and which ones maybe are a little harder for the kid? And again, trying to figure out how that all fits together, I think. And you get lots of people reading it and sort of discussing it, and I think that helps people come to sort of a confirmed and agreed upon understanding, right? A shared understanding is the word I'm looking for.
I think independent school admission folks use but resist to some degree the numerics, and that's good news actually. So we've talked about committee, and I think unless there's no evidence that a student can make it at our school, I think a lot of kids wind up in the discussion pile for all the right reasons, and it takes a long time. But, remembering that we're forming in a much more profound way than most colleges would ever presume to, a community where every seat counts, and every bed counts in terms of how these kids are going to contribute, and shape us. And so that's where those committee discussions yield beyond the numbers, the opportunity to advance a student that you met and you just know, in every bone in your body, that this kid is going to make a difference in your community. So that's what we try to do.
Because I've been in a college setting where we review 10,000 applications a year, and that's a small
Yeah.
compared to like the big flagship schools. And we
Yeah.
just don't have the time to
No.
have that discussion because it's literally impossible to devote a large amount of time to each file. There's a committee-based evaluation versus first and second read, which that's just how
Yep.
different the college admission side is from the boarding school
And
side.
we are all small to medium-sized boarding
Yeah.
schools,
Right.
and so that makes a difference too, right? I mean, the larger boarding schools, you have to do it similar to probably a small college, which is a
Mhm.
different thing, right? And so those differences matter too. I think the level of attention we can each give to Pamela's sort of statement of shaping a community and with intentionality is incredibly powerful, and a power that I sort of don't take for granted, right? That I both love and am in awe of at times. It's just amazing.
Especially in February.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
So I guess shifting gears a little bit in time for those PG applicants, reclass slash repeat students. Obviously, they're coming in later than an eighth grade applicant going for ninth grade. So I was wondering for those PGs, maybe those 10th or 11th repeats, are there specific course requirements or recommendations for those students since they are further along in high school than the in their, I guess high school compared to an eighth or even a ninth grader? Or is it going back to the contextual piece that here's the rigor that's presented to them in ninth or even 10th or 11th grade, here's what they're doing? How does that process, if any, is different for those PG and reclass versus your, I guess, your more traditional boarding school applicants?
I'll be really quick and just name two things. Our kids need to be able to get our diploma, which means that by the time, when they're coming in, they need to have earned the same distribution among the courses we offer as any other student. And so
Mhm.
that's the easy part. Are they tracking toward that, or can we see it happening in their last year? And we hate putting kids right up against a diploma
Yeah.
in the spring. And then the other piece is that we know they're going to be in classes with other kids who've had the benefit of our schools for more than 1 year. And so can they keep up? And more importantly, can they be contributors? And they don't have to be polished, but they have to be hungry. And they have to also know themselves well enough to know that I am the new kid, I'm old, and I've got something that to bring. Um, but I'm also a leader. Like, kids are going to look to me, even though I'm brand new. And so it's that social piece as well as that academic, but it's diploma And then, can you play ball in the classroom with other kids?
Yeah, I think just that, I mean, that was really well said. That exactly what we look for. I think the reality that every year later than ninth grade gets more and more competitive is just that's kind of the way our schools are all set up, that we leave a fair amount of space in the 10th grade for some schools that finish through the ninth grade, or kids that have tried their hand at public school or somewhere and want to make a change at that point. So but every year 10th grade is a little bit less competitive than 11th, which is the most competitive for us is the PG year, followed by 11th and 10th and ninth. So as you start getting more and more competitive, you get more and more compelling reasons to take kids, right? And so that becomes whether it's we need a tuba player or a soccer goalie, right? This kid is an amazing student, and there's all different factors that can help schools, and we look for kids that are going to fill multiple buckets in some of those ways, right? That get the most bang for your buck that you can for the those spaces, sorts of things that are opportunities. But we find some really outstanding kids that come to the party a little bit late, and it's no, not their fault. That's just the path that they've taken. So I think some of our most intriguing kids come through that process, and they're able to add so many wonderful things to all areas of our school life. But sometimes it gets tough when we only have a certain amount of spaces in the grade, and we have a few more kids than those spaces, and we got to either talk to our academic dean and create a few more seats, or we gotta pull some strings somewhere and set up a tent in the quad for some rooms, or I don't know what we're doing there. But yeah, it's some wonderful kids have come through that process, and like Pam said, it can be a little bit of an adjustment. Sometimes those kids come from really competitive environments and they become leaders very quickly. But every case is unique, and every case is a lot of fun to work with.
So it doesn't sound like any of the schools in the room, though, mandate a repeat year, correct? No one
Correct. Not
does?
us.
Yeah.
We'll invite it if we
Correct.
love the student but don't see the path in the assumed time. We're happy to engage with kids. And some will come to us saying we're reclassing.
But it's not, yeah, okay, I got it. Well, for the audience, there are many schools in the US that do, right? That they will require you to reclass on entry. And it's an important question to ask. For not to speak for the others in the room, but for us personally, if there's no academic need to reclass, we're not going to push it. But at the same time, families will, as Pamela said, like they will come to us with a reason why they'd be interested in repeating that year. Now that can be a big range of things. It can be physical maturity in a young boy. It could be an athletic reason. It could be maybe one academic subject that's kind of, feel that they can produce a greater final product if they can spend some more time on that and during a repeat year. So at that point, if it's a parent driven thing, it's, we want to get as many people involved as we can in that, going from academics to house director to coaches, and then kind of coming up with a recipe that works, hopefully both for the school and the family. But it's not, and then if there are cases, Pamela, like you kind of alluded to, I mean, there's no shame in repeating. And I think when kids coming from the public system find themselves in our schools, like they find that it happens a lot more frequently than they might imagine around a bunch of high flying kids.
And that's a very regional thing too. So me being down here in Texas, first of all, most kids in Texas, they think of a boarding school. They're like, oh, what did I do wrong? I'm being shipped off, right? That's not how it is anymore. It's not conflating with military school. And then the same thing with like reclassifying versus repeating. Down here in most public schools, when they hear that, what did I do wrong? Like am I so far behind everyone else that I have to start over again? But it's much more of a different answer, right? You need an extra year to adjust. So there's always kind of regional kind of misconceptions around
Sure.
boarding school admission as a whole is also the reclass repeat option too.
Yeah, and
And
I think, sorry,
understandably, because I was just going to say, sorry, the
nope,
public schools don't allow a repeat
right.
Yeah.
unless you failed. So it's
Yes.
completely understandable that these kids are like, what? Unless they've been working with someone who says, especially if it's bigger, faster, stronger, smarter, you know,
Mhm.
that it's worth that extra year of physical maturity as well as brain development, right? So forgive me, Scott. I
No,
just,
no, no, it's a great point. So just to sort of synthesize this for the audience, like I love what my colleagues are saying here, right? So one is there is sort of often growth between ninth and 10th grade and 10th and 11th grade at schools. And so there are spots. So like you should not think this is an impossible thing.
right.
And to Matthew's point, like boarding schools are an incredible opportunity. These are places you would be blessed to go. This is not prison at
It's not a
all,
punishment, right?
right? Number three, the repeating reclassing, to Patrick's point, there are some schools that do require it. The four schools on this call are not those schools. And so, but if you are interested in, there are some good reasons to consider it for some students. It's worth asking. And then the last thing I'd say is just a misconception I often see is a lack of ability to see a distinction on a family's part between reclassing or repeating a grade and repeating courses. Repeating a grade does not always mean repeating classwork that you've done. It can, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. In fact, it means often you have more years to just go broader, deeper into subjects you're really excited about, and strengthen your transcript rather than just redoing things. I think just to clarify, sort of
That's a
sum
great
up the
point.
things. Those are important conceptions.
And then going forward on the college side, like I read applications that had multiple transcripts and we didn't look twice at it. We said, oh, they went here, then here. Okay. And then we just moved on, right? It was like we didn't gasp in surprise, like why in the world did they change schools and why they repeat 10th, 11th grade? Like most of these colleges do have a sense of,
Yeah,
okay, here's what happened. The Common App does have some great resources where you can actually explain things in detail, but it's up to you to actually explain it. So don't feel like when you're reclassifying, repeating that it's going to be a scarlet letter on your application to college because they're more savvy than that.
great point.
So now kind of shifting entirely, we've kind of alluded to earlier about standardized testing, right? This is a huge topic. It kind of permeates from college all the way down to the secondary schools. So in terms of U4, test required versus test optional, I think there was two or three of y'all are test optional. Do we have any test required schools?
With
Okay. So,
caveats.
so Pam, do you want to go first about kind of how
Sure,
the test
sure.
required works and how it fits in within y'all's holistic review process?
Sure, and I'm happy to light up a good conversation
Yeah,
here. It's not a binary world, right? I mean,
yeah.
we're all being really thoughtful, partly because of COVID and higher ed beginning to open that door to test optional, out of practicality. All of us also considered what was the right move for us. So we are test required with the caveat that if we're the only school asking for the SSAT, we will waive it if the family prefers not to take it. And the other thing is if a student has with her educational or neuropsych testing, which frankly we find very
Much more.
useful,
Yeah,
and more so than a standardized test, we're delighted to have that. And the truth is, the landscape on the average is growing around kids who come with that kind of testing.
Mhm.
And there's less and less embarrassment or shame associated. Although for some kids, and this is an equity question, there are kids who have never had testing, both because it would be sort of anathema to what makes them feel like kids who are achieving, but also they don't have the luxury of paying for it, or accessing it through their schools. So with that said, what I'm going to throw out there for us to discuss later after others comment on their approach is the question of bias and the association of bias with testing, which I'd like to challenge, and also testing as a predictor. I agree it's not. There isn't particularly evidence that it is, but it does nonetheless yield some insights.
yeah.
So I can't wait to hear from others.
So for you test optional folks, I guess the first place to start is when have y'all always been test optional? What was or what precipitated the switch and kind of maybe walk us through the conversations from that test required to test optional.
Scott, you want to go or?
Up to you. If you looked ready to speak, so why don't you go? I'll go after you.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah, for the Canadian perspective, let's start
The
with that.
Canadian
Right?
perspective is that the Americans are very, it's a very test reliant academic culture, and not as much as maybe, China or something like that. But I mean, like, testing matters, and you hear talk right from grade 9, grade 10 about SATs, ACTs, and preparing for these things. And I got to get into a great college, otherwise, I got to get these scores to get there. So we've never been a test a school that's required testing, simply because like 2/3 of our kids are from Canada, and they're not really growing up in that same environment where they're thinking about some kind of standardized test that's going to be the segue to something else and then to something else. So, a little aside, like, people in here will be maybe surprised to know that like Canadian universities don't look at standardized tests, right? Like it's basically your grades, your profile, maybe an interview, but it's pretty much relying on how you do in school. And of course, those universities internally are going to have their own rubrics, right? They're going to say, well, okay, like 80% at this school is kind of, equivalent to 75% at this school, and they'll have that. They don't necessarily share it out, but that's what they do in effect. But we have found it useful as part of our application process, because we do get report cards from all over the place. In Canada, education's provincial jurisdiction. The report cards we see from Ontario are slightly different from Quebec, or slightly different from Vermont or somewhere else. So what we kind of settled on is with the help of our teachers and our department heads, we'll give a small grade level assessment in English and math to kids as part of their application. So, for example, like grade 10 applicant, okay, these little half-hour tests you can take online are designed by our teachers. They're going to foreshadow content that you're going to take next year. And then it's like, okay, so, and they get marked by our teachers. So it's like, okay, well, this matches with the report card, that's fine. Or like, oh, there's a real big gap here. There's very low test and a very high report card mark. Well, that might indicate, some kind of test anxiety or something like this. But we found it to be pretty successful. We found it to be pretty reliable in terms of putting our classes together, right? Like, for example, as a small school, we'll have 4 or 5 sections of math in grade 11, and by kind of going through that data and initially placing kids, of course there'll be some movement in the first couple of weeks, but we found it to be pretty effective, and the teachers like it too, because they're kind of engaged and they get to know a little bit about the new kids and the skills they have, where they're ahead, where they're maybe a bit behind on the way in.
Good stuff. Solebury used to require a standardized test, the SSAT or the IC. We would take either. And I, for a long time, had been interested in becoming test optional and hadn't made the move. My background is as a history teacher. I was a full-time history teacher for 15 years. And in my classroom, which I still teach a little bit, like, I don't do a lot of in-class tests. I think in-class tests teach a certain set of skills that are good skills and relevant skills to life about how fast you can work and how fast you can recall information and solve problems and those things. And that's a fine skill. For my history class, I'm much more interested in writing and kids thinking and taking their time to sort of show me what they know and what they've learned. So that by itself is one of my issues, has always been one of my issues with standardized tests in general, right? That it teaches a certain set of skills that are worthy skills, again, but they're not necessarily indicators of intelligence or aptitude or predictions of how a kid is going to work and show up in 3D when they get to your school. As I learned more about the SSAT, one of the other things that I sort of started worrying about was math background, and this is an equity issue that Pamela was sort of referencing, right? So the SSAT for the ninth grade, relies a lot on Algebra 1. And if you're a kid who hasn't had a rigorous, to go back to the earlier conversation, a rigorous math background, hasn't had a lot of Algebra 1, the math section is really challenging, like partially impossible to do really well on. And so I worry about that. And I worry about us making decisions based on that information about a kid. So when COVID came, I got some courage and permission to do what I had been interested in doing, which is become test optional. And I've remained so because it just makes me feel like I'm serving kids and their families well. These tests take time, they take money, they take all kinds of things. And yes, there are fee waivers for some families and all those things, but I just don't, I don't feel like the benefit from them is worth sort of the risks in terms of our interpretation of a kid or the burden it can place on a family. And so I totally have the other point of view. It's just, I don't know, for better or worse, someone put me in charge of my department here and I get to decide. So I've decided that's what I want to do. And my schools trust me to sort of feel like I can do my job well and understand kids and shape a community and all the things that we're supposed to do without it being required.
We like probably everyone else, we went test optional during COVID as access and all that stuff became more unpredictable. I think, boarding schools follow the higher ed in a lot of ways, and a lot of the big push for a while was to go test optional. I think we're seeing some schools bringing that back, that they want that data point back in there. That's a piece of their application, and so some of the boarding schools are following that tact and kind of requiring that piece in some ways again. I go back and forth. I argue with myself sometimes that it's really valuable. It's not very valuable. One of the pieces I do miss when we don't get a lot of testing is the essay on the back, the handwritten piece that I think that tells a lot about the kid when you can compare for us three separate writing instances, right? Something that they've submitted to a teacher that's gotten graded, something that they've written in their application, and then something that they've written for the SSAT, and comparing and contrasting all three of those pieces was always an interesting, kind of mechanic through the application process. And sometimes it was figuring out who else wrote essays for the application in there too. But I can see the value in sort of creating our own, in a way, standardized test that is Suffield specific and grade level dependent. I just worried sometimes about the buy-in from teachers that are working hard enough grading 40 or 50 kids, and asking them to grade 1,000 more would, I'm sure, cause some some issues. But yeah, I think it was helpful when it was a piece in there. It wasn't a cause to immediately tear up an application, but it was much like, I think Patrick would probably use it to help decide whether should this kid be in honors or regular section of English, right? Like having a kid come in really low, really high could give you some sense of, maybe we should be talking about this kid with learning support. Maybe there's other issues going on. Man, this kid knocked us out of the park. Maybe his sending school is really tough. So there's, again, just another piece of that information, piece of that puzzle that you're trying to put together on each kid from there.
So how about, I guess, specific tests based on the age or grade of the applicant, right? Going back to that PG late reclass student, which they might have taken even an SAT or an ACT, maybe PSAT. And does that happen first of all? And if so, how is that, I guess, evaluated in comparison or contrast to those classic kind of SSAT, IC, those I guess secondary school admission tests? How do y'all kind of figure that for those older applicants?
So we partner with our college office for anyone in 11th and 12th grade,
Okay.
just to make sure we're not causing them enormous headaches through this process. And so we're never going to be outright test required, but we're much more preferred for 11th and 12th grade, because we know, especially for domestic kids, pretty much everyone has at least a PSAT. Most kids
Mhm.
have an SAT or an ACT by that point. So there is a test, whether they're willing to share it with us. That's but we get more towards the test preferred side of things for the 11th and 12th grade. And that's just so they know our college office can see where that profile is gonna fall, and whether that's something that we can work with, we can't work with in terms of placement and those sorts of things from there. So, that's where we know it's not an access thing, it's not a availability thing at that point. If they're from the U.S., then they've taken that PSAT as a 10th grader, most likely, sometimes 11th grader.
That's exactly the same approach that we take, Tim. The older you get, your application is made aware to the folks in college counseling, and again, like, we're about 15% American students, and typically, if I have a American that's coming as a junior or a senior, um, we'll encourage them to share what they have with us, just to have all the cards out on the table.
Yeah.
Agreed.
And I guess also thinking about, I guess, state-based standardized testing, right? So I always think about New York for like the Regents scores, and those are usually on every transcript, whether they want those scores on there or not. So
Right.
how would y'all approach like any testing if it's allowed from like a state body, like if they're from Texas or New York or California? How does that come into play when you're thinking about the test required or test optional pieces? Or does it at all?
I mean, it's added value if we're otherwise requiring the SSAT at Walker's. Always happy to see in the context of state. Um, we'll use Connecticut state tests on our younger kids if they're balking at taking a test.
Mhm.
More is better in terms of information to us, but not at the expense of a kid. And I'll just say the last thing I want, and I suspect I have peers who feel the same way, is for a student to just begin to focus on test prep, which is a whole nother question about equity. We understand that you can learn how to take a test if you do it enough and get good coaching and you pay for that. And there are so many kids who show up and take it once out of, best effort, goodwill. And so we have to reconcile that in our internal processes when we're evaluating kids, just as we do with a variety of transcripts from different schools. It is not, and finally, I'll say a test score is never the impediment to admission singularly. It is simply data that we either need to align and with other data or explain why it's different.
Yeah.
And you know, so
That's
it's yeah.
That's incredibly well said, Pamela. I love that, and your point about equity was one that, because I was speaking off the cuff before, it was one that I meant to say earlier as well. That was a great one. But I mean, Matthew, and to answer your question, I think the more lenses we can get into a kid, the better we're going to be able to do our job. The better we're going to be able to construct an accurate story about who this student is, right? And understand their strengths and their challenges, their weaknesses, the things they're working on, the areas of growth, the areas where they're going to shine and just come in and be great. And the more lenses is better. So if we have state testing, if there is an SSAT, those are great. It's not that we can't do it without it, but the more lenses, to Pamela's point, like you can say one of these things is not like the other, and you can better evaluate why it's an exception, right? And why it's not the story. And so more lenses is great. So that's why it's a multifaceted process. It is the essays and the interview and the grades and the recommendation and some testing sometimes, and with yes, all these other things. And so the goal is to have as accurate portrayal of a student as possible. And more lenses yield a truer story. They always do.
And beyond the admission process, the more information we get, then once a student enrolls, that helps us support them more, right? Get them the right advisor, put them in the right classes, put them in the right sections. Like, so it's not just we're putting all this effort forth just for someone to read our file, three people to read our file. We'll talk about you for half an hour, and then all that stuff gets shoved in a closet somewhere. Like all of our academic team reads that, all the whole application once the student's enrolled, the college office gets involved. So a lot of people at school are getting value from the effort that families are putting into these applications. And then we sit down with our dean of students office and pick advisors and roommates and those things. So all those additional little nuggets that we pick up from all these additional pieces that can be in an application, are really helpful throughout the whole process of enrollment and, when the arrival finally happens in September.
Perfectly said.
And then Patrick, you kind of brought up how Canada is not as we'll say test crazy for lack of a better term, as some other countries in the United States. So I think that's a great kind of piece to end on. So I was hoping as we wrap up this evening, was just some advice for our students and families viewing this, just about how to approach this process from an academic kind of standpoint. So if you can just kind of share with us, based on your experiences reading applications and kind of understanding academic context within the admissions process, what advice would you share with prospective boarding school students and their families?
Mm.
I'll give two, I guess. So one is um, to be to be authentic, to give a real portrayal of who you are. Not think that you have to be perfect. That schools want to know who you are. That's the best chance to find the right school and, to Tim's point, to get in the right classes and the right advisor and all the things. So the more honest you're going to be in your essays, that they're really your essays, that they're to tell us about what's going on in school, to share testing if you have it, like of the educational testing, the neuropsych kind of variety, right? All those things, be honest, gives us the best chance for you to be in the right place, right? And that's incredibly important. And the second, I guess, would be to talk to us, right? I mean, admissions people are guides. Our job is to help families navigate this process. And Pamela said it so well at the start, like, we do what we do because we love kids, and we love kids being in the right place where they can be successful. And when that's at our schools, that's amazing. And when it should be at another school, that's fine too, right? But there are so many wonderful schools out there. Be open to finding the right one, and you being honest and letting us help you can make that happen as well as possible.
If your son or daughter is excited about this prospect, and they should be. In some cases, it's the parent's idea, and then as you do some visits, or the student talks to some friends who have lived it, they may, the enthusiasm may perk. But if the student is excited about this, like, give it to them to lead it. I mean, we hear from families every single day, parents who of course they'll sing their kids' praises until page 5 of the email, right, on how great they are, what they do. but I mean, like, it really does mean something to me, and it's a differentiator at this point when I pick up my phone and it's a kid that's going to start the process themselves and kind of ask those questions, and then say, I'll and I might have to ask, like, do your mom or dad know that you're going down this route? And they'll say, oh yeah, like, we're talking. So it's kind of refreshing now and then, but it's more the I don't know if I can speak for everybody, but it's the exception rather than the rule, right?
Yep.
Sometimes.
Yep. I would say be curious, create choice. It's fine to be ambitious, but also be honest with yourself about what's feeling like alignment with a school, because, at the end of the day, you're the one going. And then finally, I would say, trust yourself and trust us, and never let an admission decision determine how you feel about yourself.
Yeah, I would just second all of those. I mean, that's so well said. I think the trusting the people that that you put, listening to people that you trust is a big part, and the people that know you really well, parents, coaches, teachers, educational consultants, advisors, people who have, your best interests at heart. Sometimes they're not always saying the things you want to hear, but end up being correct in the long run and be in the right place in the long run. So be open to a wide range of schools, find that place that feels like home, and lean into it full bore. Don't always have a foot out the door looking back home. Be able to jump in with both feet and enjoy the environment when you get there.
Okay, great. Thank you all. So on behalf of Pam, Scott, Tim, and Patrick, thank you for watching this. I hope this was informative and kind of set aside some preconceived notions about, first of all, what boarding school is, and also how academics can fit in within the application review and admission process. So hope this was informative and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks all.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Matt. Good luck, everybody.
Thank you.